So this episode is going to be very juicy. We have the honor of welcoming Andrew Melrose onto the podcast. He really is an expert authority when it comes to mold. He is the owner of the Mold Authority, and he has really paved the way for the mold industry and getting knowledge and awareness out there when it comes to mold, and mold specifically in the home. So I am very excited to share this episode with you. Without further ado, welcome Andrew Melrose. So I'm excited to have Andrew actually on the podcast. A lot of you who follow this podcast know that we talk a lot about mold, and I would consider Andrew kind of the mold expert when it comes to, everything mold. So Andrew, thank you for being here and sharing your perspective. We really, really appreciate it. Let's start off with kind of how you got into mold.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I have always been into health and wellness, really every side of it. Very fascinated by how the body works, mind, emotions, spiritual, all of it. What I didn't know much of anything about was the environmental side. And so when I met a friend, Tom Ray, started to see that he was in that industry, started shadowing him a little bit. And within the first 2 to 3 weeks of, really seeing what he did in the testing and inspection space, I started to see that this was a much bigger issue than I initially thought. And it kind of was like, it was just a big kind of light bulb moment of there's a whole industry here that I didn't know anything about, and how the environment can really impact us. And then also just the financial, aspects that come with it when mold, really is an issue in the home, what it can do to just be a stress on a lot of different levels. So I started doing a lot of inspections. I've done hundreds of in-person inspections and testing on homes and buildings, and then started to see the demand was really high for how do we navigate these situations with testing, remediation, maintenance, and preventative maintenance as well. Throughout the country, I started to see that demand was there. So then I got online and walk people through one-on-one consultations that way, and do photo analysis and report, interpretation and all that. But lots of hands-on experience that really, that's what I'm also teaching people and educating on now.
Yeah, because I want to get into your course, because I know that's, kind of your baby too, as well as, educating people. One of the questions that I did have is where do you suggest people start? Because a lot of the times, I see like those at-home kits where people can kind of like, swab things. Is that the same? Is that something good to start with? What's your perspective on that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very, very good question. And that's everyone's main one. So I like to parallel the home and the body a lot. So if your body is not feeling good, you should do as much as you can to, really like assess your lifestyle, assess your diet, assess certain things before maybe just spending a lot of money on a random test to just, you know what I mean? There's a lot of different angles of testing you can do on the body that might not show everything all at once. And so with the home, if you just run a random ERMI test, and we'll talk about what the ERMI is in a bit, that's not going to give you much information all by itself. It's literally just going to tell you what's in your innocent looking household dust that you collected, and whatever the lab tells you is in that dust, you're maybe, scared that there's a lot, or you're feeling so relieved that there's not much. Well, I've seen very low ERMIs where there still are, mold colonies in the home that and sources that you can find, and vice versa. People have covered every base they possibly could, and some ERMIs are still showing up a little bit elevated. So what I really recommend to people is get to know your house and know what to look for, where to look, and start to get a little bit of a trained eye. So even on my Instagram page, I've been putting a lot of these like 7 to 10 minute longer form whiteboard style videos, so that people have a little bit more context of and understanding about what to look for in the home and how a home is working, and basically start to do your own inspection for free and check these spots first. And then if you're going to do some sort of testing, you can do an ERMI test to see again what's in the dust throughout the home, or you could do these at-home air sample test kits where you're like very suspicious of what's under this sink that smells bad and looks funny. Maybe that's a place to put an air sample more effectively than maybe the center of your large living room. Okay. And so there are different testing strategies. I just need to put a disclaimer that, and I've done, again, thousands of different tests, but the tests are only one piece of the puzzle. And there are many times that I have found things visually or seen a, construction defect or, wrong installation of something. And that a test will never tell you about. The test is literally just going to be what type of, spore count and types of spores are there, which can be good and needed information. But the more of a trained eye and knowledge of the current state of the home and the history of the state of the home and the history of the home, you can really tell a lot of the home health. And so if you would like, I can even mention like certain things that are a little bit more likely to have mold issues than
Yeah,
not.
let's
Yeah.
go there. I mean, anybody who hasn't taken a look at Andrew's page, I do suggest going to your reels, because you have done a really great job of breaking that down into digestible pieces where you can kind of, evaluate your situation and what's going on in your home. So I think that's a great resource. Like, please go there for yourself and your family. But yeah, let's jump into that.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I actually saw the downside of like one Instagram post, that's 2 slides long or 30 seconds, and it's a good clickbait and a good, it's like very scary. Oh my gosh, mold. But
Yeah.
if that's all the information you have on mold, you're really not going to be empowered to know what the next step is. And so I was like, all right, let me do these longer form videos and give some more context that way.
100%.
So okay, when going into a home, let's say you're looking for a new one, there's still a lot that can go wrong in a new home for sure. With again construction defects and maybe even installing the wrong size HVAC system has been kind of a common thing lately. Um, Kicking on the HVAC system during the building process can draw a lot of construction dust in it. So there's a lot of things, and even during the building process, is the wood that they're using already waterlogged, already contaminated? Was there a massive rainstorm that wasn't dried out properly? A lot of things can happen for a new build for sure. And even how the homes are built these days is very tight, which can cause, like they say, they're doing it for energy efficiency, but that can also cause more condensation in the home and less circulation and ventilation at times.
Okay.
But then you go to old homes and you're like, okay, we are inheriting the history of this home, whatever the history of it was. We don't know how many owners were here. If you're going into a 40-year-old house, you have 40 years of different seasons potentially and climates and how people, how they treated the home. Are you going into an old home with very old carpet? Now there's a lot of microscopic history there. Is it a 20-year-old HVAC system you're inheriting that you might need to change out soon? Anyway, so it's weighing the pros and cons of like the age of the home doesn't always mean like, okay, new home, you're good. I like for if it is like a 5-year-old or so home, I do like our odds that there's only 5 years worth of potential issues there. Still, it's worth inspecting very thoroughly. But like I mentioned, the most common places where mold has kind of highest concentrations would be in a crawl space. Most homes that have a crawl space underneath your home, you're living on top of that. The stacking effect takes place where the air pressure and temperature differentials will move air from the bottom up into the home a bit. Some homes a lot more than others if there's gaps in the floors and things. That's usually on older homes. But if there were floods down there and a lot of high bacteria levels and things like that, there is some sort of movement from that air, sharing up into the living space a bit. So crawl spaces are not always a complete deal breaker, but 9 times out of 10, they need something done. And then the maintenance of it, and no one likes spending money under their house. I mean, that's like the least, our least favorite way of spending your money, right?
Yeah.
So if you are looking for a home, maybe an unfinished basement, if there is a basement. I mean, slab can be really good if the slab is done well and there's good drainage around the home. But an unfinished basement could be even better than a finished basement at times, because you can see what's on the wood and the framing around it and really have that properly assessed before maybe you finish it. But anytime we're underground and subgrade, there's more likelihood for drainage issues or humidity and things like that. And then finally, and I'll let you talk because I'm just continuing to go on and on, but there's so much to the home. So yeah, crawl spaces and basements can be one, because there's a lot of surface area, and that a lot of surface area will influence more of the air quality throughout the house. Okay. And same with an HVAC system. So if that system's highly contaminated with a lot of discoloration on the coil, for instance, or a lot of like caked up dust. I mean, it's so common that you take a filter out of the ductwork, or you go into an HVAC system and you see there's like ½ inch of just like a ton of dust in there. So if you tested that dust, you'd probably find some sort of mold for sure. But just that amount of dust level blowing through your system and therefore blowing through your house, you definitely want to get that cleaned or maybe even replaced entirely as well.
Right.
And then finally, water damage spots where there's building material bubbling, warping, cracking in areas that are already discolored. Even if it's old water damage that wasn't handled properly, that's where mold has a chance to grow. So I always say mold is like a microscopic plant or tree and how it's structured. So when a spore lands on a surface and then there's moisture to add to it, that's how you would water a plant. That plant would take root, that's the exact structure for the most part, as you know, how mold can grow in and on surfaces. And there's different ways of removing and uprooting that stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because I see a lot of patients who have new builds in their housing, and they're like, oh, I just bought a new house. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting, because all of your symptoms point to mold toxicity. There looks like there is something kind of going on in your house. I mean, typically, yeah, when we look at old childhood homes, they're going to be the ones that have the most history. Like you said, it's common to kind of have that mold exposure. But I am seeing specifically, like we're up in Fort McMurray, so we had the fires a couple of years ago.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
what happened is a lot of new houses were built, but they were built poorly. And just because of the conditions of the environment up here, there's a lot of mold affecting people, specifically in new builds and old builds. So that's one
Right.
thing that I think people get confused with, because they're like, oh, it's brand new, like there's not going to be anything in the house. And then there is still kind of that, increased prevalence of exposure, like it can still be there. So I think that's a common misconception with
Hmm.
people. One of the questions I do have for you is, I know there are some people who, of course, are in apartments, which is a whole other kind of situation. And then
Yeah.
there are people who unfortunately can't get out of their housing situation. They're kind of stuck in that, paradigm of whether it's financial or situational. What advice do you give to them? Because obviously, the best thing is to move out of their house, but if that's not the option, what's the next best thing?
Yeah, very, very good question, and I get that one often as well. They say in the body and the home, the best solution to pollution is dilution.
Right.
So we are trying to dilute that best we can. And I am more of a fan of filters and fans rather than a bunch of technologies to kind of like spray and pray in your house as some magical solution.
Okay.
And I did get that from Corbett from Home Performance, is the fans and filters being the most effective. So if I can plug anybody's information, his goes a lot in parallel with mine. Home Performance on YouTube is the page to look up.
Okay.
And the how he talks about circulation, ventilation, HVAC systems, how homes are engineered, even the placement of different things is very, very fascinating stuff. And I know how a home works and know the mold side of it specifically, but he runs circles around me as far as all the building science and building biology of how homes are built these days and those different issues.
Okay.
But it's very important to keep circulation in the home. More fans the better. Opening windows can dilute that and allowing cross ventilation to happen. So opening windows on either side of the home can cross ventilate and get some fresh air from outside. Hopefully it is fresh and not with the fires. That's different.
100%. Yeah.
But investing in a good HEPA vacuum, HEPA vacuum, that's going to collect the smaller micron, spores and fragments that won't be picked up by a normal, vacuum that you have that isn't HEPA, and that will be collecting up anything that is residually left behind or is cross-contaminating potentially throughout the house. If it just depends on the mold situation, is like how bad really is it? Because if it's like here's a very extreme example. If you're walking in the house and you automatically are feeling like something's hitting you right away when you're walking in the house, that's a pretty acute situation. Your body's obviously going on, the antenna's going off, right?
Yeah.
And that's a huge test in itself that doesn't cost you money, just costs you symptoms to walk in and feel like really bad and feel better when you leave. Okay. So that's, if it's that type of acute situation, you are going to want to make whatever efforts you can to leave. But if there's lower levels and you can really strengthen and fortify your body while diluting, the home via, cleaning, air filters, which are not, again, going to solve the issue, but will kind of help it in the meantime, that would really be good. So if you're in a renting situation, I consult with those people all the time, and it's just kind of landlord dependent on if they're going to do something and how they're going to do it and things like that. And I've also helped people with some DIY jobs that are more according to the right protocols, but just again depends on the situation.
Yeah. So where's your kind of headspace when it comes to like dehumidifiers and that kind of thing?
Yes, I'm sorry. That's a big one for sure. Dehumidifiers can, because mold needs moisture to grow. So if there's a
Right.
source in the house, obviously less moisture is not going to, it's going to like make it not proliferate even more. So
Right.
yes, dehumidifiers is very, very good to lower that moisture content and even prevent, the spreading of it for sure.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so there's obviously multiple types of spores, multiple types of mold. I'm just curious, kind of in your own personal findings, what do you see the most of? And then obviously we know that black mold is one of the most toxic, but I'm curious if you see, different types of mold that are actually more toxic than black mold.
hmm Yeah. So the most common family that like a lot of people are probably have heard of as well is the Aspergillus and Penicillium.
Yep.
Those two each have 200 to 300 species each within them. They look about identical under a microscope, and so that's why they're usually paired together. When I'm saying Aspergillus and Penicillium, they usually hang out together. Many times are gray, white, greenish type of dust, powdery, looking substance, and so they will happen on water damage. But also, if a basement, for instance, has terrible circulation and ventilation and high humidity, you might see that white gray, dusting on the wood, for instance,
Mhm.
and that's usually an Aspergillus and Penicillium type. Of those 200 to 300 species each that are in those families, some, not all, are mycotoxin producing. So when disturbed, they will release the chemical byproduct of mycotoxins, and that's why that ERMI test, ERMI,
Mhm.
has a handful, let's say 1 to 2 dozen of Aspergillus and Penicillium species, because they're the more mycotoxin producing species that are on that test. That's why a lot of the health
Interesting.
practitioners really like the ERMI, because it's speciating those more hazardous types.
Mhm.
And then when it does come to black mold, there are many other molds that are black in color that are not the most toxigenic ones. So cladosporium, for instance, is a very, very common one. If you go into a restaurant and you see like black on or around the vents, especially like on the metal vents, that's usually a cladosporium type of mold. And I call it personally a warning mold because it's black in color, so you're going to see it a little bit easier.
Right.
You might freak out, but that needs longer term water damage for it to become toxigenic over time. Most times that's how it works. So if this sheetrock gets wet and sits there for a while and more moisture is added to it and it's not handled right, that's what's going to start to grow the Stachybotrys black mold or the Chaetomium toxic black mold. Those two are, again, when it's not being handled, and more water is being added to it, it's kind of survival of the fittest at a micro level, and it gets stronger over time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
curious, actually, do you know about the mycotoxin test by Great Plains Lab?
Yeah, I know a lot of people take them. I don't read them myself as my main like go to. I just add that as like a data point of like what people are showing. And there's a little back and forth for me personally. I would love to like hear your thoughts on it. But like if you're getting rid of mycotoxins in a urine analysis, there's a little bit of silver lining that maybe your body's like actually getting rid of it. Some people are so toxic and
Right.
stopped up that it's not even coming out of the urine at all.
Well, 100%. And I mean, that's where I'm curious actually what this ERMI test is, because I've actually never heard of that before. And the thing
Okay.
with the mycotox test is it's better than anything else on the market, but it's still not 100% reliable, like anything,
Yeah.
right? So, and
Yeah.
I mean, I really look at symptomatic picture. Like you can tell when somebody's
Good,
in
good.
front of you, right? That's telling you these symptoms, if mold's in their system.
Yeah,
Uh,
Melanie,
you
so
know?
agree. Like how
Yeah.
someone's feeling in the house versus out of the house, what they're sensing, what they're smelling. Like we're made of all this stuff. Like the biology is made of like so much, fungi, bacteria, viruses. Like we have so much of it all
Mhm.
in us and on us all the time. And so our bodies are going to notify us if we're uncomfortable. And so paying attention to symptoms and different correlations are very, very important. Every time the AC kicks on or the heat kicks on, like we have this happen, or it's only when I'm waking up. Like there's a lot of different correlations to put into the mix.
Mhm.
This ERMI test, by the way, is the EPA designed it. You can go. I've done in-depth videos on it, so you can go and watch that. And I won't repeat myself too much, but
Okay.
they designed it like 15 years ago on only 1,500 homes. So right there, to me, that's a very very small amount of like for a test to even be very legitimate. But I
Right.
like it as a data point to just collect. They send you a Swiffer pad. You collect dust. That's why it's so easy for everyone to use. Is they just order this Swiffer pad. They collect dust throughout their home on 10 different surfaces, and the lab tells them what was in that dust. Well, there's a lot of vagueness there because which surface really shot the score, the levels up
Right.
versus, there's just a lot of different potential errors in that test, but they are speciating via the PCR DNA analysis on what is actually in that dust. And of the 36 species they're measuring, you can see what you're being exposed to at a dust level.
Mhm.
Um, because dust is also a historical picture. What has been in the air settles on the surface. You collect the dust. Maybe you're getting an idea of what has been in the air as well.
And I know you talk a lot about remediation, right? That's a foundation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's pretty much a
Yeah.
foundation of your protocols, which I completely agree with. You want to reduce exposure, right? And then you want to eliminate. So,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
So remediation, the best way to describe it is removal. So if there is a visible mold source in and on sheetrock, most times that has to be completely cut out and taken out. It really can't be cleaned and saved.
Okay.
That's because sheetrock is very porous. And so, and like I said, the more toxigenic molds usually show up there when water interacts with it.
Mhm.
If there is mold in or on wood, wood can be cleaned and saved, just very thorough cleaning under the remediation protocols that, again, I've outlined on a lot of my videos as well, but it's a manual removal. And so instead of trying to kill or treat mold, those two words are not really the goal, because
Right.
let's go back to the analogy of plant or tree. If mold's like a plant or a tree, let's say you had a Christmas tree in December at your house and you want to get rid of it in January, you're going to take the tree out and drag it out the house to get it out. You're not going to, fog it or spray some magical thing on it, hopes it
Right.
disappears. The goal if mold is in the house is to remove it. And so you're either removing the building material that it's embedded into that you can't save, or you're, manually cleaning it up and off those surfaces. And there are mold remediation companies that should be following standard protocols to do that the right way.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I was in actually my student house. This is how I kind of like stumbled on mold. I was reflecting back on my university days, and our
Yeah.
landlord actually completely, like, this is crazy to me, but he ended up taking the house and he completely flatted it except for the basement. So he kept the basement mold, which still had black mold all over the walls. Like, it was completely filled with black mold. But he was just like, "Oh, you just don't go down there. That's like the solution to this." He completely
Oh,
flattened it, built a brand new house on top of a foundation that was swimming in black mold. So
wow.
we were in the student house and I was on the top floor. I was in like the crawl space. And then I had kind of like a ventilation system that obviously is circulating all of the air in the house. And I started to get immediately sick. Like, I started getting panic attacks. And I was like, oh, like, I
Whoa.
went to the doctor and the doctor was like, oh, it's probably just stress from school. They came out of nowhere. Like, I genuinely thought I was dying, because I don't know if you've had a panic attack before, but it was something else. And I
Uh,
can't even say it was a panic attack. It was mold toxicity is what it was.
wow.
But
I think that is so common at schools. I'm so sorry you went through that, because that's
yeah,
like I think those schools are gnarly, like really filled with like all types of stuff.
yeah,
And yeah, and these kids probably think they're just stressed or whatever. And then some of the lifestyle of like, just eating on a very low budget and whatever other habits, like it's a tough mix there.
100%. But yeah, I
Wow.
mean, I'm glad there's a little bit more regulation when it comes to obviously new houses and stuff like that. But one of the things I do want to talk about is treatment, and I don't know how far you go into treatment. What do you recommend for people in that area,
Mhm.
or physical kind of stuff?
Yeah, very good question. So there's a bridge that's being built between those who are like testing and healing the home and
Mhm.
those who are testing and healing the body. And that's a bit
Right.
of what this conversation is. I'm more on the side of testing and healing the home. So I know enough to be dangerous for sure about how to get the body healing and feeling good, but my protocols are more so around the house. So I have a lot of health practitioners who are working really, really in depth with these people to not just hit the 4-letter M word, but really get a nice holistic approach to heal your body overall. Because I have definitely a belief that the more fortified your body is and more resilient, the more resilient it will become towards environmental factors to a degree, right? We can't get it to absolute zero all the time, but kind of the 80-20 rule.
Yep.
And I personally got my genetics test, and I have the MTHFR gene and the HLA-DR gene, which have both been linked to you have troubles with mold. And I can definitely see that, because there were many inspections where I've like left the house and been like, my gosh, that was way worse than I thought when I was in there. I feel like I got hit by a truck. So I get home and hit the infrared sauna, and take the binders and start really sweating it out, and I bounce back fairly quick. Mitochondria, keeping those strong, is very, very important to
Yep.
bounce back faster. But there's this other aspect. I've been speaking with some friends of mine, and maybe it'd be worth me connecting you with some of them for like a
Yeah.
very in-depth like body healing with mold as well, but we can go there a little bit.
Mhm.
But that they work on the body all day long, every day.
Yeah.
It's very interesting how women seem to be a little bit more affected than men.
Yep.
Not every time, but many times. So I do think that estrogen and other things play into that. Even mold connecting to fat cells, and how You really got to get the biofilms broken down and out. But when it comes to mold, yeah, the number one thing is to get the fish in a different aquarium, so leave the
Yes,
home, go
trained.
to a different one if it's a really, really bad one.
Yep.
Now that can also be a hamster wheel in itself, because some people are, we just have to be realistic and weigh our pros and cons of are we able to leave this house, and is it really worth leaving or not? Because we really need to, again, not have our expectations to get it to absolute zero. No house is going to have that, but getting it to a lower concentration where we're going to be feeling okay. And then, yeah, taking the right binders can be very helpful, while still making sure you have proper minerals in your body, so that you're not just binding and taking all the good out with it.
Mhm.
Sweating, getting outside, sunlight is so powerful against mold, and also to, for the mitochondria as well. And just living a lifestyle of more, movement, whatever you can do. I know sometimes mold or other illnesses can be very debilitating, but your body is made to move, wants to move, and that is a life changer, even to just go for an outside grounding walk or whatever you need to do to be outside. Fresh air is the best air. And so
100%.
those can be some of those foundational ones. And then obviously making sure you're hydrated and eliminating properly. So
Yeah.
sweating and eliminating every way you can, and staying away from the more obvious mold foods, I guess, as well.
Yeah.
Alcohol is definitely not a helper. Many peanut butters with the aflatoxins and bad style or like coffees that are very cheaply made and things. That's not going to help.
Unfortunately.
That's not going to help your cause. I know. Yeah.
Every time
That's
I'm
what.
sitting in front of a patient, I always feel bad when we go over the foods. And most people are addicted to coffee. And that's one of, you probably know, the highest sprayed crops, the highest, in mold crops. So it's always the first that I got to take out. And I always feel bad.
Do you know about King coffee? That's like the best stuff.
I do know. Are you
Yeah.
talking about organo?
Yeah.
Yeah. The reishi mushroom.
Ever since I've been on that, I don't really drink other coffee now. Feel good on that. They test for all that stuff, and one
Yeah.
cup a day, I feel rocking and rolling. So
Yeah, I do. Actually, Dave Asprey has a line of coffees too. I don't know if you've heard about his
yes,
ginger coffees. I'm a
yes,
huge Dave
awesome.
Asprey fan, so I do like the bulletproof and stuff like that. But
Yes, yeah.
yeah,
I definitely forgot. He's got he went through it himself, so I think he definitely needs to cover that base before releasing something.
yeah. Well, that's where we all come from, right? We all usually go through it, and that's how we get on these topics.
Exactly.
I'm glad that you mentioned those healing stuff though, because yes, like I'm a huge fan of saunas. Saunas can do great things for sweating things out. I have actually seen more prevalence of mold in women. And unfortunately, children, I'm seeing it a lot. I have a huge
I know.
pediatric practice, and just
Wow.
because their immune systems are unfortunately weaker, their detox abilities are always a little bit struggling at that age. I'm just seeing a
Right.
lot of mold. I am using a lot of, I don't know if you've heard of Cellcore before.
Of course.
Yeah, the Cellcore protocols are quite good. I do homeopathics, a lot of elimination, drainage, like you said, making
Awesome.
sure that biofilms are broken down. The other thing is actually co-infections, and I don't know if you've come into
Yes,
that. Yeah.
for sure.
So co-infections, unfortunately, that's when you see like the extreme mold case where someone's got Lyme, they've got Staphylococcus, and now they've got mold
Yeah.
on top of it, and they're in a little bit of a worse situation than somebody who just has that acute mold exposure. And actually, what I find interesting is that those people will symptomatically present immediately in the presence of mold, just because
Right.
they're so heightened and so sensitive. They can pretty much walk in any environment, and that's when you get that acute kind of response.
Yes, for sure. That's that can be a blessing and a curse at the same time. I just try to really help people mentally not to think it's only a curse, because like that can be just a tough life to live if you're like always thinking
100%.
but no, it's yeah, those symptoms can definitely show up. And I always say, like, if you were bit by a certain type of dog when you were 4, well, then your nervous system's a little bit more on on high alert when you're 24 years old when that same dog shows up. And so at a micro level, I think our bodies do recognize those previous exposures even later in life and says, that's it's back again.
Yeah, I could go down the rabbit hole with that, but we're not going to. One thing that I actually do want to talk to you is, I know you talk a little bit about like religion. I don't normally get into it, but mold is biblical, and I'm just very curious as to what kind of your perspective is on that.
Yeah, great question. So many different places I can go. I think the main thing I want to say is that when I got in this industry, I realized, like I said, within the first few weeks, that it was much more about these people who are suffering, and like really knowing the heart and soul of like those who are actually going through this being really tough. And so I
Mhm.
did very much, I had my own massive like life change, being depressed, addicted to drugs, like full of hate. I had like
Mhm.
just a wild growing up, and had a radical life change where I was just completely set free from me and from all those burdens I thought I would never not carry in my life. And so after that, it's just I want to see other people free in that same way. And I started to really pray and like ask God to show me how to best help people,
Mm.
because this stuff is nature's decomposer. And if we scandalize it too much, then we'll think there's just like a constant enemy that can never be beat. But it's outside and prevalent in nature. We just want to take good care of our recycled air box, our home, and really make it a haven that can be safe. So I've really talked to people about like we need to do the practical, natural things to get the home as good as we can, get it within reason, within control, and also, really taking care of our body, because mold can really be a teacher. And if we again take the scandal off it, we can see that mold shows up in our life and it flips a lot of things upside down for some people and can be very, very difficult. But if we only put a story of negativity, hardship, and all that around it, then we're going to keep it locked into that same definition for the rest of our life. But if we say, okay, it was very, very hard, I'm going to accept that, not deny it, but still realize that it actually came to teach me about my own body, about ways to improve my health. Wow, that was actually a catalyst for my good. And so I'm definitely a believer that all things come from God. It's just a matter of how are we going to perceive it and what are we going to name it. And that's just a very, very, it can be a very tough thing. The very thing that caused so much suffering is hard to say that was for my good, but that's just part of the process, and we're all on our journey of how that shows up. But in your case and many other cases, your suffering becomes part of that purpose that you're giving to the world around you, to say like, no, I'm getting through it, or got through it, and I'm going to help you do the same. And
100%.
so I care most about the hearts and minds of the people going through it. I want them happy and healthy, and healthy in their body, but I don't want the hardship and the PTSD almost of the scarring mentally and emotionally to hang on with them for the rest of their life, of like that was just a terrible season of life, and playing that that same negative story over and over and over, because it's
Mhm.
hard enough going through it. Let's not add all that to it as well. So knowing that we are eternal spirits and we have the power to heal, that we are truly life-giving spirits, and that spirit is giving life to our bodies even now, putting a little bit more emphasis on that ability to heal rather than our inability to heal, really.
Yeah, perfectly said. Perfectly said. And actually, that's pretty much, what I wanted to wrap up with. The last thing I want to talk about is your course, because I know you have a course and I know a lot of people are going to find value in that. What specifically do you talk about in the course and how can people find it?
Thank you. Yeah, the my Instagram page is really the place to talk, and engage with me and watch all those free videos. I tell people, if you just skip one night of Netflix and binge my page, you'll learn a lot about mold in one night, and you'll probably be good. And there's a lot of different places to go and learn about mold that are probably good spots too. But I'm very confident that you'll be, pretty well versed after binging my page a bit. This course is a mini one. I did it live with people, and it was very life changing for them. And it was really more around what we kind of just talked about, like the story that you've told yourself around mold. And so it's really about rewriting your health story. And so there is a module that's just about the practicals of mold, but a lot of it is on the spiritual aspects of it as well. My favorite module is about the 23 different representations that mold could also have in our life. So mold
Interesting.
thrives in the dark, for instance. So what could it be showing us? That we are keeping certain secrets in the dark, and it's showing us to come to the light. There's 23 different ones, so it's fascinating to go through and say, wow, I resonate with 5 of those. That's definitely something mold's teaching me about my own self. Or what some of the students were like, I resonate with 20 of these 23. I was like, good, you're gonna redeem that much more
Yeah.
in your life, and that's what it's going to show you. So that course is definitely a bit deep. It's only 4 hours long, and it's great price point of only like $279,
Nice.
but it's a life changer. Like it will completely open people's eyes to just a lot of things in life, their own life purpose, their own narrative of a lot of things in life that may be realized, but it's around those who've gone through mold specifically.
Nice.
For a mold specific resource on just the practicals, that I will have the mold handbook done in just a couple weeks, and that is going to be definitely the A to Z all-in-one resource that if you're a renter, if you're a homeowner, If you've had a lot of water damage, a little bit of water damage, you want to know how to inspect, you want to know how to vet an inspector and remediator. There's like so much to it. It's kind of 5 years worth of knowledge all in one, and that's going to be out soon. So for the mold practicals, you want that mold handbook. For the for kind of healing from the inside out, what I call it, that's where the course is absolutely life changing.
Awesome. I know every single one of my listeners is going to be interested in that course. It's definitely,
Yeah.
resonating with me personally. And I know a lot of my patients actually will be very interested in that. I'm glad you brought the spiritual and that deeper aspect into
Thank
healing.
you. Yeah. It's really needed. We have so much more in us than we know, and really rewriting our story is a very, very powerful practice to do.
Yeah.
And in that course, we rewrite our story in 4 different narratives from different perspectives. It's big time.
Nice. I can feel it. And then anybody who is interested in following Andrew, I will have in the show notes his website, his Instagram handle, links to all of his courses and handbook when it's out as well. So you'll have that there. Andrew, thank you so much for your time and knowledge. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, you're so genuine and really care about what you do and the people, and I just really appreciate that a lot. It's definitely more than just a job for you. I can definitely tell that, and would love to get your name out there more and more, and learn more about how people I work with can.
Likewise. Thank you. Thank you for the healing that you do. Very important.
You too, sister. Thank you.
Thanks.